Election night in Oklahoma. Good evening from the Oklahoman's Video Studio. I'm Dave Morris. Primary elections and voting happened all throughout today. We've been watching the results come in throughout the night with our cast of experts, reporters, and editors here at the Oklahoman. I'm joined in the Oklahoman's studio by Cathy Cummings, former lieutenant governor candidate back in 2014, representing a Democratic point of view. Cathy, we've appreciated you being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and earlier tonight we did mention she brought in lasagna, which was fantastic. It basically set the tone for the entire evening. Sitting next to her, Alex Weintz, worked for Governor Fallon for 5 years as her Director of Communications. So we appreciate your perspectives tonight as well.
It's been fun.
From the Republican side of things, and of course next to them on the news desk there, Rick Green and Ben Felder joining us. Capitol Bureau is Rick, and Ben Felder on the watchdog desk, talking all things political. Joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. right now, Chris Casteel. And Chris, you were following the 5 congressional races, and they were big winners tonight.
They were huge winners. They all won in blowouts. It was some of the margins were pretty surprising. In the first district, especially, which is mostly Tulsa County, the incumbent Jim Bridenstine beat his challenger, this is actually the only financially competitive race. Oil man Tom Atkinson up there put in like $400,000 of his own money, raised another $300,000, and was on TV constantly, and got about 15% of the vote. Bridenstine got about 81%, and all of the incumbents won big, and all should win big again in November. So it looks like there'll be no change in the congressional delegation this time. Bridenstine, of course, is running for his last term, and Markwayne Mullin in the second district, who had, kind of an interesting race, at least for a little while. He won with 63% of the vote, and looks to win in the general election in November as well.
And that was a race right there that you had foreshadowed with plenty of coverage as Inhofe and some others weighed in, right?
Yeah, that was the unusual wrinkle in that race, Dave, in that Tom Coburn got involved endorsing Markwayne Mullin's primary opponent, Jaron Jackson, mainly because Mullin seemed to be wavering on whether he was going to honor his own term limits pledge. Tom Coburn, a big believer in term limits, and endorsed Jaron Jackson because of that. And immediately, the same day, the sitting U.S. senators from Oklahoma, Jim Inhofe and James Lankford, jumped in on Mullin's side. So, as Alex said earlier, it looked like kind of a proxy war. And there was something to all that, but it'd be hard to get all of them, maybe to be as forthcoming about it as you would want them to be.
So let's recap our storylines heading into tonight. The questions were, will the incumbents weather the storm of challengers? Well, certainly the races that Chris Casteel was covering, yes, they did. Will the turnout be up after a tough session? Guys, we really don't know about the turnout tonight, do we?
Not yet. We're working on it, aren't we?
One of the things we're also working on is, will education candidates find grassroots success? And we're thinking maybe the answer to that is some.
I think absolutely yes, because so far what I'm hearing is that almost 40 of the teachers from the teacher caucus have
Some of the media reports say 40 of 78.
Yeah, so we're still on the edge. We're still not quite sure, but if that's the case, those numbers are huge. That those people are going on into the general.
And I think the question will be, are they largely Democrat candidates? Because the Democratic Party has sort of cast itself as the de facto teacher caucus anyway for a couple of years. So are we seeing something that's an actual political shift, or are we seeing strong Democratic candidates winning Democratic primaries, or an actual change in our politics? And I don't think we know yet. I do think that the 3 Republican incumbents who lost don't seem to have lost to educators, we think, after just kind of quickly looking at their bios. But we'll see, and it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
One of the other storylines we're following tonight is, with the large number of candidates, would we be looking at a large number of runoffs? And Ben, we were looking at 12 runoffs?
13. We'll have 13 runoffs. So as Rick said earlier, a candidate failing to get more than 50% of the vote triggers a runoff with the top 2 candidates. That includes the Senate district of 41 with Paul Blair. Paul Blair and Adam Pugh, 2 of the 3 candidates that are headed to a runoff. And on August 23rd to determine.
Pugh with 49%, Blair with 45%, I believe.
Yeah,
in
and
that.
he was even 49.9.
Yeah, so
You know, for
close.
Adam Pugh, which is like, I wonder how many votes that actually comes out to.
Just a few more votes, and he may have had it tonight.
Yeah.
But it'll be a runoff for him. Yeah.
So when people say that their vote doesn't matter, this would be a case where it
You know,
does.
if it's between a vote or two, he could do ask for a recount as well to
Right.
see if that would change things.
You
Yeah.
know, an interesting thing about that district too is I think there were some groups, probably pro-business groups, that were ready to get involved in that race, looked at some early polling data and said, you know what, Paul Blair's running away with it. Let's keep our hands out of it. And they, I mean, really, I think had a chance to change the trajectory of that race, and it didn't, and are probably going to be kicking themselves.
So that wouldn't have been a situation where they didn't want, there was a reason why they didn't want to support him, or that he was too far away from their views?
Now we're talking about Blair.
Yeah.
I think the business community likes Pugh, and just thought he didn't have a shot of winning, and
Oh, I see what
figured
you're
let's
saying. Okay.
save our money, and you know, if Paul Blair's going to win, let's not let's not anger our presumed next state senator, and I think they miscalculated there.
That would imply, though, that in the general, that perhaps Adam Pugh could get some of that business support.
Yeah, I think it would in a general election, certainly. Yeah, and also maybe in this runoff going forward as well.
And that just kind of shows the factionalism that's present in the Republican Party right now. There's several competing interests, and this is one of the reasons the governor had some difficulty getting her agenda through the legislature. Even though the Republicans have such a majority, they can't seem to agree on certain issues.
Yeah, I think that in some ways they've been kind of a victim of their own success, and it probably, I think it's inevitable when all of a sudden you have 70% of the caucus, or of the House, for instance, you know, you're creating such a big tent that there's going to be a lot of diverse opinions and viewpoints and coalitions, and you know, there is such a thing as a coalition that becomes so large that it's unmanageable and hard to govern, and the Republican Party is very close to that, if not have surpassed that in Oklahoma.
So it's almost counterintuitive. If their majority would come down a little bit, they may have more unanimity of opinion.
Yeah, well, it's funny, your editor, Kelly Fry, was saying before that maybe if we had a more closely divided government, more things would get done, which is sort of ironic, right? Because you'd think a one-party system, you'd be able to push these initiatives through, but what happens is, you know, as you said, there become these larger coalitions, both in elections and in governing.
You guys are becoming a big tent party like the Democrats.
Speaking of close races and runoffs, big thanks to Al McCaffrey and Tom Guild for joining us, and Juliana Keeping from the Oklahoma News Desk for providing us those interviews. Al McCaffrey edged out by 15 votes tonight.
Right.
Either way, it was going to be a runoff,
So
but still,
close.
15 votes.
Yeah.
Ben, what struck you tonight? Coming in tonight, you and I were talking about voter turnout. Is that going to be large, small? Is it going to change things? What's
Yeah,
the storyline coming out of the night now?
Well, my story for tomorrow's paper, the theme for me was going to be the incumbents and whether or not they were going to be able to weather the storm. We talked about how largely incumbents are very successful. Only one of the last 30 have fallen. Of the 28 that face a challenger today, it looks like 3 fell. So on one hand, that's still not a lot. So you can say that the incumbents, you know, relatively speaking, were pretty successful. But then 3 is 3 times as large as 1. So there was a little bit of a shifting tide there. But I think the storyline is still that, you know, it's hard to beat an incumbent. And we'll know a little bit more when we look at voter turnout. If voter turnout was about as low as it was the last cycle, or especially the last time there was a primary during an election, or during a president, when you didn't have a statewide race. We don't have a statewide race this year. You know, then we'll see that, you know, there was a lot of frustration, but maybe it didn't translate into voters. We talked about the education candidates. You know, we talked about the Senate race and Mustang, Loveless against Mason. You know, Loveless won pretty big. And
You guys thought that might be a litmus test too,
Right.
Yeah.
overall.
And it does seem like a lot of the, well, we know that the education candidates that weren't running against incumbents. And so now they may be set up to run against an incumbent come November in the general election, there'll be a more stark contrast. Obviously, you'll have a Republican and a Democrat running against each other, while now you had members of the same party that were really different on maybe one issue.
Cathy, you worked with some of them, the educators running for office. Is that kind of what they expected? Hey, if we get through this, now we're going to have to do steps A, B, and C headed towards November?
Yeah, honestly, I think that this primary was such a big deal to them. It's like, one step at a time. It's like, they prepared for this primary, and now it's like, okay, we're set. We need volunteers. They're going to try and regroup and get back on the streets and knock on those doors. And believe me, I bet you they start working tomorrow. Because, they're fired up. I bet you that they are just cheering right now that so many education candidates got through. And I'm telling you that just lights a fire under you.
Rick, what did you see tonight?
Well, I think it's interesting, now that this is over, looking ahead just a little bit to the general election and wondering whether the presidential race will have any impact on the down ticket. There are such negatives really with both candidates right now. Both leading presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, have a lot of negatives.
Their polling is highly negative.
And you wonder if that might depress some of the Republican vote and whether that might help the Democrats a little bit at the polls in the general election.
Sure. On the other hand, if you're a Republican candidate looking for a boogeyman to link your opponent with, Hillary Clinton has been a good one for, like getting into decades now, right? So I think that a lot of some of these local issues may get eclipsed by national politics in November, and it will start to become more my opponent is just like Hillary Clinton on these issues, don't vote for her. And maybe, as you said, when my opponent says wild things like Donald Trump on XYZ issues, don't vote for him. So
so they may cancel each other out.
Right.
Right.
Or it may, and it may, instead of depressing turnout, maybe there are people who, maybe it'll increase turnout. Maybe the Democrats fired up to vote against Donald Trump and his local
and some Republicans
proteges
too.
and Republicans who want to vote against Team Clinton. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean those national storylines and how they impact local races are always really interesting. I mean the saying in politics is that all politics are local, and I actually think now it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
All politics is national. I mean, I was talking to voters coming out of precincts today that brought up the presidential election. I had one brought up the Brexit vote. Not that that has anything to do with what we're voting on here in a state primary, but people are a lot more in tune with the national issues. I mean, obviously they're flooded with information about presidential elections, and that really trickles down. And sometimes they vote for their local senator or their local representative with the lens of a presidential race. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting to watch.
You laugh at Brexit, but Brexit, Trump, I mean, he's already latching on to change. See, hey, change. Candidates will latch on to stuff like that, right?
Sure. Or sort of a, don't vote with the elites who represent the EU and the stay-in campaign. Vote with the common people, and it's a populist message, and it is something that people can latch onto locally, which seems strange to us because it's so far away, but it's kind of an attitude that these candidates are affecting.
Yeah,
that's important to a lot of people.
Looking ahead to that general election, Rick, it changes. State questions come into play. What are some of the bigger issues that we'll be talking about as we head towards November?
Well, of course, the penny sales tax is likely to be on the ballot. The sales tax for schools, increasing the sales tax rate by 1%. And it's almost a little surprising because people usually vote with their pocketbooks. But on this one, a lot of people feel that teachers deserve a raise. And the polling indicates that a lot of people support this across party lines. So we'll see if that translates into a fervor for education candidates, maybe some of the Democrats that are coming through the process. That's right now the penny sales tax is still being challenged at the state Supreme Court, but assuming that gets on the ballot, that's going to be the big white elephant in the room, if you will.
Sure. I've wondered too if the alcohol modernization issue might have any effect on the electorate. It seems like something that's very popular in urban areas and among younger voters, and could have at least an impact on the margins.
Yeah, true.
And there's also a measure being referred to the ballot having to do with the state constitution and the portion of it that was used to remove the Ten Commandments monument from the state capitol grounds. This would remove that section of the Constitution that says state funds and property can't be used to support religion. I think a lot of people were upset when the Ten Commandments had to be removed from the Capitol. But then again, a lot of people feel that government and religion shouldn't mix.
That's
so
right.
That's another one of those issues that cuts both ways, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that 777 is going to be a huge issue, that state question on the right to farm. I think that is going to come up a lot. I know Drew Edmondson is really fighting that.
Sure, and the Farm Bureau is pushing in. I think what's interesting about all of these is they all have those little niche groups. You know, all of these rural ag people are going to come out and support right to farm, and you know, there will be a large kind of faith-based coalition supporting the amendment that Rick was talking about. So they do, again, at the margins, at least sort of change who votes and the frequency of what kind of people vote.
And because these have become state ballot issues, they're obviously important issues to Oklahomans. So there'll be issues that candidates are going to be asked about on the doorsteps.
Right.
I mean,
and voters better do their homework, because, you know, they're very misleading. So right to farm makes you think, oh yeah, I want the right to farm, but really it's completely different. We already have the right to farm. So it's, you know, people have to do their homework and read these questions and carefully, actually.
It's been good stuff tonight. The general election coming up in November. In the meantime, the runoffs August 23rd. At this point, it's time for me to say some thank yous. Big thanks to Ben Felder. Appreciate working with you today. Good context tonight. Rick, thanks for sticking with us all night. Good stuff. Alex and Cathy, you guys provided very good perspective. I enjoyed the way you guys kind of respectfully went at each other from the different sides of the fence. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
That is valuable. Thank you very much for the perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Our
Thanks for the
pleasure.
lasagna.
You're
It was great.
welcome.
Yeah.
All right, big thanks to Adam Kemp and Juliana Keeping for their reporting in the field. Chris Casteel joining us via Skype. Brian Dean from the State Election Board. Brought some thanks to Tiffany Gibson and Matt Carney on the online side of things for newsok.com. Phil O'Connor, Kelly Fry for helping us out. And my crew, Paige, Todd, Greg, Grayson, Tim. See Luke back there manning a camera right now, and Greg as well. Big thanks from the Oklahoma's newsroom. I'll shut up and stop talking at this point and just say goodnight.